A runaway girl hid in his barn. The lonely giant cowboy said, "If they ask, you're my wife now." The wind whipped across the open fields, carrying the scent of dry grass and wildflowers. The sky was painted with streaks of orange and pink as the sun began its slow descent behind the distant hills. In the fading light, a young girl ran, her bare feet brushing against the dirt, her breath coming in sharp, hurried gasps. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the distant bark of a dog, even the soft whistle of the wind, made her heart race. She did not look back, though she knew that someone might be following her. All she wanted was to keep moving, to keep herself out of reach, and to find somewhere safe. Her name was Emily, and she had no idea where she would end up. She had left behind everything familiar, her small home, the town she had grown up in, and the people who had made her feel trapped. She didn't have a plan, only a desperate hope that she could disappear somewhere far from the eyes that always seemed to watch her. Her clothes were torn and dusty, and her hair clung to her damp face as she ran across the open land. She didn't know if she would find a place to rest before nightfall, and the thought of being caught made her stomach tighten with fear. In the distance, through the thickening shadows of evening, she saw the outline of a barn. It was large, made of dark wood, and looked old but sturdy. The barn sat alone on a hill, surrounded by fields stretching in every direction. Something about it made her stop for a moment. Its quiet presence, its isolation. But she did not hesitate long. She ran toward it, hoping it could provide shelter. Maybe no one lived there, she thought. Maybe she could hide and rest for a while and no one would find her. When Emily reached the barn, she pressed herself against the wooden wall, her chest heaving with exhaustion. She could feel the rough texture of the wood beneath her palms, grounding her for a moment as she tried to calm her racing heart. The barn doors were slightly open, enough to slip through, and she did so without a sound. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of hay and animals, a mixture of earthiness and warmth that made her feel both nervous and safe. The light from outside filtered through cracks in the wood, casting long, uneven shadows across the floor. She glanced around, searching for a place to hide, and noticed a stack of hay bales in the far corner. Quietly, she crawled behind them, pulling her knees to her chest, trying not to make a sound. For a long time, Emily just listened. She could hear the soft creak of the barn as it settled, the distant call of a bird, and the wind moving through the cracks in the walls. Each sound made her flinch. Each shadow made her turn her head nervously. She knew she could not stay hidden forever. She needed someone to find her eventually, someone who could help. But she also knew she could not trust just anyone. Her mind replayed the reason she had run. Her fear, her loneliness, the constant feeling of being trapped. And yet, in that barn, there was a small, almost imperceptible sense of relief. For a moment, she was not being chased. For a moment, she could breathe. It was then that she heard a low, deep voice. It was calm but carried authority, a presence that filled the barn without needing to shout. "You shouldn't be in here," the voice said. Emily froze. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She had not expected anyone to be inside. Slowly, she peeked from behind the hay bales and saw him. He was a man unlike anyone she had ever met. Tall, broad-shouldered and rugged. His skin was tanned from long hours under the sun, and his hands were calloused, the kind of hands that had worked the land for years. His eyes, though, were kind, even as they held a careful caution. He looked at her not with anger, but with curiosity, as if he were trying to understand who she was and why she was here. I'm sorry," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't mean to." "You didn't mean to what?" he interrupted gently. His voice was calm, patient, but there was an edge that made her heart tighten. "You're here now. You can't just disappear." Emily shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. I have to hide. Please don't tell anyone." The man studied her for a long moment, his eyes scanning her small frame, the dirt on her clothes, and the fear etched across her face. Then, without a word, he walked over and knelt down so that he was closer to her level. He didn't reach out to touch her. He knew better. But there was something in his posture that made her feel like she wasn't in danger. "You're safe here," he said quietly. "But you can't stay hidden forever. Someone will notice eventually." Emily's voice shook. I don't know where else to go." "I don't have anywhere else." The man nodded slowly. "I see. Well, then you stay here tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure it out. But for now, you're safe." She hesitated, unsure if she could trust him. But the exhaustion in her body won over her fear. Slowly she nodded and allowed herself to relax, just a little. She felt a strange mix of relief and uncertainty. Relief that she was not alone. Uncertainty because she didn't know if she could really trust anyone again. He stood and walked to the far side of the barn, moving a few hay bales aside to create a small space where she could lie down. "Here," he said, motioning to the cleared area. "It's not much, but it'll keep you off the floor." "You need rest." Emily crawled into the space, feeling the hay prick against her skin but grateful for the shelter it provided. "Thank you," she whispered. The man didn't respond immediately. Instead, he returned to his work in the barn, feeding the animals and checking the stalls. Emily watched him from her hiding place, noticing the care he took in each movement. There was strength in him, yes, but also patience and attention to detail. She had expected someone rough or unkind, but he was different. As the night fell, the barn grew quiet except for the occasional rustle of an animal or the soft creak of the old wood. Emily curled up on the hay, her mind replaying the events that had led her here. She thought about the life she had left behind, the people she had run from, and the fear that had driven her to take this chance. But now, in the quiet darkness, there was a small spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could find safety here. Maybe she could trust this stranger, at least enough to rest. The man finished his chores and finally sat down on the edge of the barn, keeping a watchful eye on her. He didn't speak much, but his presence was comforting. Emily drifted into a light sleep, knowing that for the first time in a long while, someone was looking out for her. Outside, the wind continued to whisper through the fields and the stars began to emerge in the clear night sky. The barn, old and weathered, stood as a quiet sanctuary against the dangers of the world. Inside, Emily slept, exhausted but safe, unaware of the bond that was slowly forming between her and the man who had taken her in without question. And in that moment, both of them, each alone in their own way, found a connection neither had expected. One was driven by fear and the need for protection, the other by quiet strength and a willingness to help. The night stretched on, holding them in its calm embrace, and the first chapter of a story neither could have predicted began to unfold. Morning came slowly, the soft golden light spilling over the barn and fields. Emily awoke to the smell of fresh hay and the quiet lowing of cows in the distance. The events of the previous night felt like a dream. Her escape, the chase, the fear, and yet she was still here, safe in the barn. Her muscles ached from running and hiding, but for the first time in days, she felt a faint sense of relief. The man who had sheltered her was already moving about the barn, tending to the animals with a calm, steady rhythm. She watched him quietly, not wanting to disturb him, and noticed how naturally he worked with the animals. He fed the horses, brushed the smaller animals, and checked the water troughs, all with careful hands and focused attention. There was a dignity in his work, an unspoken respect for the life he nurtured on this isolated ranch. Emily felt a pang of curiosity and admiration. She had never seen anyone so connected to the land and the creatures that lived upon it. Eventually, he noticed her stirring and looked up. His face was serious but kind, the deep lines around his eyes softening as he smiled faintly. "Morning," he said in his low, measured voice. "Did you sleep at all?" Emily sat up, hugging her knees to her chest. "A little," she admitted, her voice small. "I thank you for letting me stay," he nodded, returning to his chores. "Everyone needs a place to rest when the world is against them," he said. "Just don't get used to being lazy." There was a hint of humor in his tone, but beneath it was a sincerity that made her feel welcomed rather than scolded. After a while, he brought her a small plate of warm food, a simple meal of bread, cheese, and fresh milk. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until she took the first bite, her stomach grumbling in relief. She ate quietly, trying to make her presence unobtrusive. "You don't have to be afraid of me," he said after a moment, noticing her tense posture. "I'm not going to hurt you. You can stay here as long as you need." Emily hesitated. Her instincts told her to be wary, but there was something in his calm demeanor that made her want to believe him.
I just don't know what to do next," she admitted softly. "I don't have anywhere else to go."
He looked at her thoughtfully. "Then we figure it out," he said simply. "One step at a time. For now, you're safe here. That's all that matters." The morning passed quietly. Emily watched as he moved about the barn and surrounding land, feeding the animals, checking fences, and cleaning the stalls. She noticed how methodical and patient he was, how he seemed to know exactly what each animal needed without a single word spoken. She had grown up around people who hurried through tasks, who seemed impatient with life itself. Seeing him work so calmly made her heart feel lighter. For a moment, she let herself imagine what it might be like to live a life like this. Peaceful, connected to the land, free from fear. Curiosity eventually got the better of her. "Can I help?" she asked tentatively. He paused, considering her request, and then nodded. "You can start with feeding the chickens," he said. "They'll let you know if you're doing it right or wrong." Emily smiled faintly, feeling a small sense of purpose. She followed him outside, carrying a basket he handed her. The chickens clucked and pecked at the feed, some cautiously approaching her, others more daring. She moved slowly, learning the rhythm of the animals, and found herself laughing quietly when one particularly bold chicken nipped at her hand. The cowboy watched her with a quiet amusement, shaking his head but saying nothing. As the day wore on, Emily began to relax in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. She realized she could breathe without constantly looking over her shoulder. She could eat without fear. She could even laugh, even if it was quietly to herself. And through it all, the cowboy remained a steady presence, patient, kind, and careful not to overstep, yet protective in ways she could feel even without words. By mid-afternoon, they took a break. The man handed her a jug of water, and they sat together on a fallen log near the edge of the field. For a while, neither spoke, letting the soft sounds of the countryside fill the space between them. Emily noticed the way his gaze lingered on the horizon, as if he were always thinking, always planning, yet somehow present in the moment. Finally, she spoke. "Why? Why do you live all alone out here?" she asked, her voice hesitant. He looked at her, his expression unreadable for a moment. "I like the quiet," he said simply. "I like having space to think, to work, to live without interference. People, they complicate things." Emily nodded slowly. She understood that feeling too well. Her own life had been complicated by people who didn't understand her, by expectations and rules that felt impossible to follow. Somehow, she felt a strange kinship with him, even though she had just met him. The rest of the afternoon was spent tending to more chores, mending a fence, checking on the animals, and clearing a small patch of land for planting. Emily's muscles ached, but she felt a satisfaction she had never experienced before. The work was hard, yes, but it was honest and meaningful. She realized that for the first time in a long time, she was contributing to something, instead of running from everything. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, the man brought her back to the barn. "You'll need to rest soon," he said. "Tomorrow we can start on other tasks, but you need your strength." Emily nodded, exhausted but content. She felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the sun. She was safe, cared for, and somehow connected to someone who didn't even know her fully yet. The thought was both comforting and strange. Night fell again, and the barn was filled with the soft sounds of settling animals and the whisper of the wind. Emily curled up in the hay, her mind replaying the events of the day. She had learned more about the man, the animals, and herself than she had in weeks. She realized that trust wasn't given freely. It was earned, step by step. And slowly, She was beginning to understand that she could trust him, at least enough to rest her fears temporarily. He kept a watchful eye on her as she slept, a quiet guardian in the shadows. He had seen fear before, in many forms, but there was something different about Emily, something fragile, yet determined. She had run from the world, but she hadn't given up entirely. That gave him hope, in a way he hadn't expected to feel for years. The barn, simple and unadorned, had become a sanctuary. Outside, the stars twinkled in the clear sky and the wind carried the scent of earth and grass across the fields. Inside, a bond was forming, unspoken but real, a connection built on quiet understanding and mutual respect. Emily had found a place where she could breathe, where she could rest, and where she could begin to imagine a life without fear. And the man, once entirely alone, found himself caring for someone in a way he hadn't thought possible. The night stretched on, calm and steady, holding both of them in its gentle embrace. For Emily, it was the first night in a long time that she truly felt safe. For the cowboy, it was the first night in years that he had felt a sense of purpose beyond the work of the land. And somewhere between exhaustion and the quiet hum of life on the ranch, both of them realized that their lives had begun to intertwine in a way that could not be undone. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more questions, and perhaps more fear. But for now, they were here, together in the barn, a temporary refuge from a world that had been cruel and unkind. And in that small, quiet space, the beginnings of trust, friendship, and perhaps something deeper were quietly taking root. The morning sun had barely begun to rise when Emily awoke to a strange sound. It wasn't the familiar rustle of the barn or the soft calls of the animals she had come to recognize. It was different, sharp, deliberate, and full of purpose. Her heart leapt into her throat as she sat up, straining to listen. There it was again, the faint sound of hooves striking the dirt path outside, accompanied by low voices calling her name. Panic surged through her. "They found me," she whispered to herself, her voice trembling. Her legs moved before her mind could think, and she crept quietly toward the corner of the barn, trying to hide behind the hay bales. But even as she crouched there, she knew that the barn's walls were thin, and that anyone who looked carefully could see her. The cowboy, already awake and working with the animals, noticed her tension immediately. "Emily," he said quietly, his voice calm but firm. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with fear. "What is it?" They're looking for me," she stammered. "Outside. I think they found me." Her hand shook, and she pressed herself against the hay, wishing she could disappear. He gave her a steady look, his deep brown eyes serious. "Then we make sure they don't take you," he said simply. "Follow me." Without hesitation, he moved toward the barn door, gesturing for Emily to stay close. Outside, the voices grew louder. Emily caught glimpses of figures moving along the edge of the property. People from the town, strangers who did not belong here. They called her name again, their tone demanding, almost threatening. Her stomach churned, and she wanted to run, to hide, to disappear entirely. But the cowboy placed a firm hand on her shoulder, grounding her. "Listen," he said softly. "You stay with me no matter what they say. I'll handle this. You just follow my lead." Emily nodded, trembling but trusting him. She had no choice. The world outside was dangerous, yes, but this man had become her anchor. She had learned in the past days that he was careful, strong, and thoughtful, and somehow she knew he wouldn't let anyone harm her. The people approached, their faces a mix of anger and confusion. Emily recognized one of them as her older cousin, someone who had been searching relentlessly for her since she ran away. "Emily, where have you gone?" her cousin shouted, stepping forward with hands raised, ready to drag her back. The cowboy stepped in front of her, his tall frame a shield between her and the intruders. "She's with me," he said firmly. His voice was calm, but there was a strength in it that made everyone pause. "If you have questions, ask me. But she is staying here for now." Emily's cousin frowned, glancing at the rugged man who stood protectively in front of her. Who are you?" she demanded. "I'm the one taking care of her," he replied. Then, with a voice that carried clearly over the tension of the moment, he added, "And if anyone asks, she's my wife now." Emily froze. Her eyes widened and her face flushed. She didn't know what to say. The words had been unexpected, bold, almost unbelievable. But she also saw the look in his eyes, resolute, unwavering, protective. This was not a joke. This was his way of shielding her from the world, of ensuring no one could take her by force or demand her return. The people outside hesitated. They exchanged glances, unsure how to respond. Emily's cousin stepped back slightly, the tension in her posture softening. The cowboy did not waver, standing firm and steady, his presence commanding respect without anger or threats. Slowly, the intruders backed away, their determination fading in the face of the man's unwavering protection. Once they had left, the cowboy turned to Emily, his expression softening. "It's all right now," he said. "You're safe. They won't bother you while I'm here." Emily's body shook with relief and lingering fear. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She didn't fully understand the bold statement he had made, but she felt the meaning behind it. He had declared her under his care, under his protection, and somehow that made her feel safer than she had in a long time. The rest of the day was quiet, though the tension from the morning lingered. Emily helped with chores, but her mind kept returning to the encounter. She realized how fragile safety could be, and how quickly fear could return if she let her guard down. Yet she also realized that she was no longer completely alone. The cowboy had taken responsibility for her, and she could feel his watchful presence guiding her. As evening fell, Emily and the cowboy sat together near the barn, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was streaked with reds and oranges, the same way it had been when she first arrived. The beauty of the scene was not lost on her. For the first time, she felt the possibility of a life where she could exist without constant fear. "You were very brave today," the cowboy said, breaking the silence. "Not everyone could face what you faced this morning without panicking completely." Emily shook her head, feeling embarrassed. "I wasn't brave," she admitted.
"I was scared out of my mind. You handled it."
He smiled faintly. "Bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's what you do despite it. You stayed with me when you could have run. That counts for something." Emily felt a warmth in her chest at his words. She realized that she was beginning to trust him in a way she hadn't trusted anyone before. It wasn't blind trust, it was cautious, careful, and earned over the past days, but it was real. She wanted to believe that she could rely on him, that she could feel safe in his presence. The night grew colder, and they returned to the barn. Emily settled into her haybed, feeling the exhaustion from the day weigh on her. The cowboy kept a watchful eye as always, moving quietly through the barn to ensure the animals were comfortable and the barn secure. There was a rhythm to his movements, a quiet strength that reassured her without needing to speak. As she lay down, Emily thought about the events of the day. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and the threat of being dragged back into a life she had fled. But she had also experienced protection, trust, and the unexpected kindness of someone who did not have to care for her, but chose to anyway. She realized that perhaps there were people in the world who could be relied upon, who could offer safety and support without judgment or expectation. Her thoughts drifted to the cowboy, to his calm demeanor, to the quiet power in his presence. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew that as long as he was near, she had a chance to find her footing again. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to hope, not for the world to be easy, but for the possibility of safety and belonging. The night passed slowly but uneventfully. Emily slept fitfully, dreaming of fields and open skies, of a life where fear did not rule her. The cowboy remained awake, vigilant, his eyes scanning the barn and the surrounding land. He had faced challenges before, but protecting someone like Emily, someone so small, so vulnerable, yet so determined, was a responsibility he took seriously. He had made a promise, unspoken but clear, that no harm would come to her as long as he was there. Morning came again, softer this time, with a quiet light that promised a new beginning. Emily woke feeling a mixture of fatigue and relief. The events of the previous day had left a mark on her, but they had also strengthened her. She understood now that fear was a part of life, but it did not have to control her. And she understood that trust, once earned, could create a bond stronger than fear. The cowboy greeted her with a nod and a small smile. "Another day," he said simply.
"We'll take it one step at a time, as always."
Emily returned the smile, feeling a sense of purpose she had not felt before. She was not just hiding, she was learning, growing, and discovering what it meant to trust someone. And for the first time, she allowed herself to feel that she could belong somewhere, even if that place was as simple as a barn on a quiet ranch. They worked together through the morning, completing chores and preparing for the days ahead. The air was filled with the sounds of animals, the wind rustling through the fields, and the quiet hum of life on the ranch. Emily felt a sense of connection to the land, to the animals, and to the man who had taken her in. She realized that her life was beginning to change, not through grand gestures or dramatic events, but through the small, steady acts of care and protection. By afternoon, Emily and the cowboy were sitting together in the shade of a tree sharing a simple meal. The world outside the ranch existed, yes, but for now it was distant and manageable. She felt safe, she felt seen, and she felt the beginnings of a bond that would grow stronger with each passing day. The threat that had come so close yesterday had reminded her of the danger in the world, but it had also shown her the strength and courage of someone willing to protect her. And as she looked at the man beside her, she realized that perhaps the world was not as frightening as she had believed. Not when there were people willing to stand in the gap, to face fear and danger so that others could live safely. As the sun dipped low once more, Emily understood something she had not known before. That safety, trust, and care were not just distant ideals. They were real, tangible things that could exist even in a world full of uncertainty. And for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that she could be a part of that world, not as a victim of fear, but as someone protected, valued, and seen. The morning light spilled softly across the ranch, painting the fields in golden hues. Emily woke to the quiet sound of the wind rustling through the tall grass, mingled with the low, comforting sounds of the animals stirring in the barn. For the first time since she had run from her old life, she felt a sense of calm that wasn't tinged with fear. She stretched and slowly got to her feet, glancing around the barn where she had come to feel a tentative sense of belonging. The cowboy was already awake, tending to the animals as he had every morning. His movements were deliberate and steady, and Emily watched him for a moment, noticing the patience and care in every action. It struck her how seamlessly he moved with the land and the animals, as if he belonged to them as much as they belonged to him. She felt a quiet admiration for him, a mix of respect, gratitude, and something she didn't quite understand yet. He noticed her watching and gave her a small nod. "Morning," he said simply. "Sleep well?" Emily nodded. "Yes," she replied softly. "Thank you for everything." He returned to his chores without speaking more, but his steady presence was enough. Over the past days, Emily had realized that actions often spoke louder than words. He didn't need to say he cared. She could see it in the way he protected her, guided her, and offered her a place to rest without judgment. After finishing with the animals, he turned to her. "You ready to start the day?" he asked. Emily straightened, feeling a little more confident than she had the days before.
"Yes," she said. "I want to help with whatever needs doing." They began by repairing a section of the fence near the edge of the property. Emily worked alongside him, hammering the posts into place and securing the wire, feeling a sense of pride with each task completed. She realized that working together with the cowboy wasn't just about chores. It was about learning trust, patience, and the rhythm of life on the ranch. He guided her carefully, showing her the proper way to hold the tools, how to keep balance, and how to observe the land. As the sun rose higher in the sky, Emily felt stronger and more capable. She noticed a change in herself, an awareness of her own abilities, her own resilience. She had spent so long feeling helpless and afraid, always running from one danger to another. But here, on this quiet ranch with this patient man, she was learning that she could face challenges without being overwhelmed. During a break, they sat under the shade of a large oak tree,
sharing water, and a simple snack. Emily took a moment to study the cowboy, noticing the quiet strength in his posture and the calm determination in his eyes. "Do you ever get lonely?" she asked softly, almost afraid of the answer. He looked at her thoughtfully, a faint smile tugging at his lips.
Sometimes, he admitted, but I've learned to live with it. I like the quiet, the space, and the rhythm of this land.
It gives me time to think and to do the work that matters.
Emily nodded. She could understand that.
She had spent so long surrounded by chaos and expectations that didn't make sense, always trying to survive rather than live. Here she was learning that there could be a life where she could grow, learn, and even find joy in the small, steady things. The rest of the morning was filled with more work around the ranch, cleaning the barn, gathering firewood, and tending to the garden. Emily found herself laughing quietly when a mischievous goat nipped at her sleeve, and the cowboy's quiet chuckle followed her, a sound that made her feel lighter than she had in years. They worked side by side, and Emily began to understand that life could be simple and fulfilling without the constant threat of fear or worry. By afternoon, the sun had begun to dip toward the horizon, and the warm glow of evening filled the fields. Emily and the cowboy paused to look out over the land they had tended together. The fence was repaired, the animals were calm, and the garden showed signs of growth. There was a sense of accomplishment in the air, a quiet satisfaction that came from honest work and shared effort. "You've done well today," the cowboy said, breaking the silence. "You've learned quickly, and you've shown patience and care. Those are qualities not everyone has." Emily felt a swell of pride at his words. "Thank you," she said softly. I
feel stronger. I think I can face more than I thought."
He nodded, a small approving smile crossing his face.
"Good.
That's all I ask. Step by step, day by day. That's how we move forward."
As the evening settled in, Emily felt a strange sense of belonging.
She realized that she had spent so long running from the world, always hiding and afraid, that she had forgotten what it meant to feel at home. Here, she had found not just shelter, but a place where she could exist without fear, and more importantly, she had found someone who would stand by her, guide her, and protect her, without demanding anything in return. Night fell slowly over the ranch, and the stars began to twinkle in the clear sky. Emily lay in the hay, listening to the quiet sounds of the barn, the wind, and the animals settling in for the night. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the fear, the running, the uncertainty, and realized how far she had come. She was no longer entirely alone. She had someone she could trust, someone who cared for her well-being, and a place where she could grow into herself. The cowboy remained vigilant, moving quietly through the barn to ensure everything was in order. Emily watched him for a moment, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. He had given her more than safety. He had given her hope. And in that hope, she found the courage to believe in a future she had never dared to imagine. Days turned into weeks, and Emily settled into the rhythm of life on the ranch. She continued to learn from the cowboy how to care for the animals, how to work the land, and how to approach life with patience and attention. She discovered strengths within herself that she had never known existed. She was no longer a girl running from fear. She was someone capable, resilient, and slowly, quietly, happy. The cowboy, too, changed in ways he hadn't expected. The quiet companionship with Emily brought a warmth to his life that he had long thought impossible. Her presence reminded him that connection and care could exist even in solitude, that trust and loyalty were not burdens, but gifts. He had taken her in to protect her, yes, but in doing so he had opened his own life to something new, a bond that was unspoken, yet deeply felt. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink, Emily and the cowboy sat on the edge of a small hill overlooking the ranch. The field stretched endlessly before them, a canvas of green and gold under the fading light. Emily felt a deep sense of peace. For the first time in her life, she felt that she truly belonged somewhere, that she had found a place where she was valued and safe. "I'm glad I found this place," she said softly, her voice barely above the whisper of the wind. "I'm glad I found you."
The cowboy turned to her, his expression gentle. "I'm glad you stayed," he said. "You've brought something here that I didn't realize was missing. You've brought life, laughter, and hope."
Emily smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest that went beyond the fading sunlight. She had learned that life could be challenging, yes, but it could also be beautiful and fulfilling when shared with someone who cared. And she had discovered that trust, patience, and kindness could build a home stronger than any walls or fences. The stars began to appear in the darkening sky, and the air grew cooler. Emily and the cowboy returned to the barn, where the animals were settling in for the night. She crawled into her hay bed, feeling the exhaustion of the day and the quiet satisfaction of a life that was slowly, steadily becoming hers. He moved quietly through the barn, ensuring that everything was secure. For the first time in many years, he allowed himself a small smile as he glanced at Emily sleeping peacefully. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and danger, and she had grown stronger. And in protecting her, he had found a connection he hadn't realized he needed, a bond of trust, care, and quiet companionship. The night stretched on, calm and serene. Outside, the wind whispered through the fields, carrying the scent of earth and grass. Inside, Emily slept, safe and cared for, her dreams filled with possibilities she had never imagined. The cowboy kept his watch, a silent guardian, knowing that together they had built something lasting: safety, trust, and the beginnings of a home. In the quiet of the barn, with the stars shining overhead, Emily finally allowed herself to hope for the future. She had escaped fear, found protection, and discovered the strength within herself. And as she drifted into a deep, peaceful sleep, she knew that the life she had longed for, a life of trust, belonging, and quiet happiness, was no longer just a dream. It was real, and it was hers.